Welcome back to the Decipher Podcast. I'm here with my colleague, Lindsey O'Donnell Welch. We're here to sort of break down what was a pretty crazy 24 to 36 hours in the security news world. I'm just thankful this happened yesterday, Lindsey, and not Friday as we're recording this, which is usually when this stuff happens in security.
Knock on wood.
I know. Yeah. Well, I'm just going to
Yeah.
turn my laptop off after this. And if
Yeah.
things happen on Friday, too bad. I'm sorry. Like, I can't help you.
Exactly.
So there were several big stories that that happened. So I think we're going to talk about two or three of them. The one that I think was the most interesting to me, honestly, was the detailed blog post that Microsoft put out. I think it was Thursday morning or maybe Wednesday evening about their completed investigation into how some Chinese-backed attackers stole a signing key from them earlier this summer. I believe it was in July. And, they disclosed it at the time. They said that some of their enterprise customers had been targeted. I think some US government agencies as well. Their Office 365 and Outlook 365 installations had been hit. And everybody at the time was like, well, wait a second, how they get the signing key? Those kind of things are usually protected. They're on machines that don't have internet access. They have all the protections you would think of in like war games or something like that. So how did they get it? And they came out with this blog post, and it essentially came down to literally just this cascading list of failures. You wrote the story. So what did you think when you saw what they came out with?
Yeah, it was really interesting because, as you said, it was like a series of different failures and errors that it was just kind of happened in this really randomized process. But then also
Yeah.
there was a compromised Microsoft engineer account, and that's how the attackers were able in the end to access it. There was kind of a lot there that all just collected, and it's not like it was like a clear cut path, like they did this, they did that, they did this.
Right.
But essentially what happened was that um, there was a system crash in April 2021, and that led to the crash dump file. There was a race condition that allowed the key to be in that file. And usually those keys aren't in the files.
Right.
Because of this condition, it was in there. And then from there, the file was moved from the production network, which is usually really like highly isolated and restricted, into the debugging environment, which is on an internet connected corporate network. So after that happened, all of these like tiny errors that Microsoft says has now corrected at this point, after the fact. Um, the uh, the account that was belonging to the Microsoft engineer was compromised, and through that account, attackers were able to access that crash dump file that contained the key. So it's not like I said, it's not like a clear cut thing. Like there were
Yeah,
all
not at all.
different errors, like 1,000 different little
Yep.
paper cuts there. And I think it's really interesting. The big question that I saw a lot of people kind of speculating about on Twitter or X, was that did attackers just get like insanely lucky here, or was this something where they were already kind of sifting through these files and kind of had some sort of understanding that maybe this might be an opportunity? So I mean, obviously I'll never know, but I thought that was kind of an interesting aspect to all of this.
That's the thing that struck me immediately, honestly, was as soon as you sort of read through and you see what the chain of events was, and that initial crash you said was in April 2021. Microsoft first detected this in July of this year. So that's more than 2 years but we don't know exactly when, the attackers figured out what they had. It could have only been in July. It could have been a 2-year process for them to be like, oh shit, now we know what this key signs, and now we can go back and reverse engineer it and figure out how we can, get into some customer's account or something like that. It does seem like a combination of extreme bad luck on Microsoft's part an extreme good luck on the adversary's part, and then probably some very hard work on the adversary's part, I would think too.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. And what's interesting is when I was writing this story up, I was trying to be like very like active in how I chose my wording because I didn't want it to sound like, attackers were, actively hunting out this
Yeah,
key or anything, but it could have potentially, like you said, like just been an opportunity, like extremely bad luck on Microsoft's end and extremely good luck on the attacker's end. So yeah.
I think that's what it comes down to, honestly. And I mean, I was texting with a few researchers yesterday about it, and that seemed to be the consensus was, a combination of very bad luck and very good luck and some insanely hard work from the attackers, which, if they're, I think Microsoft identified them as a Chinese government backed group. It's a group that they track and other research teams track. So we know they're well resourced and not lazy and not stupid. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's a crazy story though. I read through their research 4 or 5 times before I really got the sequence of events, and I'm still not completely sure I understand what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, and one other kind of, interesting angle to all of this story too is just, like, the greater ripple effect that this has had in the security space, and I know
Yeah.
that, we've had, Ron Wyden, like, talking a bit about, how companies need to take responsibility for securing their platforms. And the Cyber Safety Review Board also announced that it would be looking into this as part of kind of cloud security and things like that. So it's just interesting to see how this plays out. And obviously, Microsoft is trying to be very transparent because of the pushback that it's getting. And
Yeah. And
um,
I
yeah,
think that looming CSRB investigation, I don't know if that's the right word, but review
review.
um, is probably hanging over their heads as well. Because I know a few of the folks that are on that board, and they're not gonna they're not gonna take it easy, I don't think.
Yeah.
So, another one of the stories that I think was really interesting, especially from an enterprise perspective, is yesterday the Department of Treasury and the Department of Justice, as well as an agency in the UK, announced some sanctions against some alleged members of the Trickbot malware group, which everybody has sort of known was affiliated with the Russian intelligence services. And actually, the same agencies had sanctioned a separate, I think, 7 other alleged members of the Trickbot group about 7 or 8 months ago, back in February. But yesterday, in the new announcements, they were very explicit and said the Trickbot group is tied to Russian intelligence. They said it 2 or 3 times in the press releases, which is extremely unusual. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Usually, they have very specific coded language that you can read into, but I can't recall ever seeing that before. So that was one part of it, which was interesting to me. And the other part is this: if you're an enterprise that gets hit by a Trickbot, ransomware, Trickbot affiliated ransomware, which has been, Conti, Ryuk, Bizarre Loader, a whole bunch of other ransomware groups, you essentially cannot pay that ransom without running into your own legal problems with the US government, which is not what you want. Because now that these people and entities are designated, that means you cannot have financial dealings with them, which is an interesting problem if you're an enterprise victim in these cases.
Yeah, that stuck out to me too because just the pace that the US government has been rolling out these sanctions seems like it's been accelerating, and I'm really curious what we'll see over the next few years in terms of if that is going to have a profound impact on the whether businesses are how they'll pay, or if they can't pay, what that means. And
Yeah.
it's just an interesting part of the whole like to pay or not to pay question that we've always had with the ransomware threat. And I do feel like we're seeing a lot more of these sanctions. It's
Yeah.
definitely one method that the government has really fully embraced, in addition to kind of the charges that it had unveiled too. But like sanctions are like an actionable thing that
Right.
have more of an impact for the victims, I would say, but also like do have an impact on the threat groups as well.
Yeah, because I mean, there were also indictments yesterday from the Department of Justice, but I mean, unless these people make really silly mistakes, they're never going to see the inside of a U.S. courtroom, unless they decide to go on vacation in Santorini, which some of these people sometimes do, or get on a cruise ship in the Mediterranean. That does happen. But otherwise, it's the financial ramifications that really have the most effects, I think, in some cases. But yeah, you're right, Lindsey. The Justice and Treasury are not messing around. The last couple of years, they've been very, very aggressive with this kind of stuff, not just with Trickbot, but a bunch of other ransomware groups and other cybercrime groups really going after them with the financial end of this, trying to disrupt the payment ecosystem, which is really I think, the biggest hammer that they have.
Yeah, definitely. And one other thing that's not really related, but I love looking through the sanctions and kind of the indictments and just knowing what they know and better understanding how these groups work.
Yeah.
Like they were naming these people, but also saying specifically what they were doing within kind of the Trickbot syndicate, and it reveals a lot of how these operations work and what goes on behind the scenes. And so those are just always really interesting from a threat intel perspective
Yeah.
to better understand kind of what's going on behind the scenes there.
I love that too. And one of the people that was sanctioned yesterday, they listed as an HR manager for the group, which like
Yeah.
really kind of caught me. I was like, okay, this guy's an analyst. Here's a coder. Here's a developer. Here's the HR manager. Like, I guess the people got to be paid. They got to take time off. They need
Yeah.
to know all that kind of stuff.
If they're gonna get how else are they gonna put in for PTO?
Right. Someone's got to take care of that stuff. It's
Yeah.
yeah. They're probably not using Workday.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think the last thing I wanted to talk about with you was the Apple security bulletin yesterday, which was tied to a new Citizen Lab report that also came out yesterday about a couple of iOS 0 days, one of which Citizen Lab found, and the other of which Apple listed as internally found. So my educated guess is that, Citizen Lab found this one, disclosed it to Apple, and then the Apple engineers sort of looked and found another bug that had been used in the same attack chain
Mhm.
along the way. But anytime Citizen Lab puts out one of these reports, it's always kind of chilling because it's usually a victim, it's usually a journalist or somebody else in civil society, civil rights workers, human rights workers, sometimes diplomats that get hit with these. And these are, I think in this case, it was a zero-click exploit chain, which essentially means the victim probably got a text message or some other notification that was silenced, and it triggered the exploit for the bug on their iPhone, which is a pretty terrifying scenario when you think about it.
Yeah, yeah. To your point about Citizen Lab, like when I was reading the initial disclosure from Apple was, pretty brief as Apple does. Like when it's
Yeah.
disclosing these, they'll have the CVE, they'll say, what the bug is and how they mitigated it, but not too much else. But then when I saw the Citizen Lab reporting credit, I was like, oh no. So
Yeah.
and then, yes, and Citizen Lab basically was saying that they found the flaw initially when they were working with an employee of a civil society organization. So you can kind of get the sense that this was like something that was is probably like highly targeted, but also
Yeah.
because it is a zero click exploit chain, like this is something that people are going to want to go update probably pretty soon, probably immediately. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
That's the point I always try to make is you always see the headlines that are like, patch your Apple devices right now, like drop everything and go do it.
Mhm.
But when you read through this is literally one person that had been targeted with this. Hopefully they found it early on in the use of this attack chain. But for people, regular people watching or listening to this, they are likely not the victims of this kind of high end attack chain. But once this stuff gets out in the wild, other uh, other bad guys can reverse engineer it, see what the problem was, see where the bug was, maybe find other bugs, that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's always worth keeping your Apple devices up to date. That's for sure. And I think they did say later in the day, they added something to the Citizen Lab report saying that if you have lockdown mode enabled on your iPhone, it does break this attack chain, which is great.
Mhm.
But lockdown mode is pretty restrictive, and I don't know if you've ever turned it on. I had it on for a couple days, and then I was just kind of like, this this device is not usable, you
Yeah,
know. But
I
I
don't
mean,
think
that's
yeah.
it's for high value targets. If you think or know that you're targeted with this kind of stuff, lockdown mode is for you. But otherwise, it's very restrictive.
Right, yeah, I don't know if, like, the normal, like, iPhone consumer is necessarily gonna have lockdown.
No, I hope not.
Yeah, so
No. All right. Well, it was a busy week that was compressed into about 36 hours. So it was always interesting. I'm just glad it didn't happen on a summer Friday.
Yep,
Yes.
and Patch Tuesday around the corner too.
Oh, good. Great.
Fun, yeah.
Awesome. Good. I'll rest up this weekend. All right. Thanks, Lindsay. Talk to you soon.
Alright, thanks. Bye.
Bye.